Hey there, students. On this clip, we're going to be going over how to complete the square. So before we start, let me just go over where the formula came from, the whole strategy came from, the whole idea of completing the square. Well, it all has to do with perfect square trinomials, okay? Perfect square trinomials. All right. When you're completing the square, all you're doing is you're creating perfect square trinomials. And one general formulation for perfect square trinomials can be given by the equation x squared plus 2ax plus a squared. Okay, so this is one general form for perfect square trinomials. There are other formulations you can see too. But what happens here if I factor this? If I factor this perfect square trinomial, what does it look like? Let's try this. I'm going to factor this using the x game. So I'm going to have AC on the top and B on the bottom. So basically this is A, the coefficient here, which is 1, B is 2A, and C is A squared. So AC goes on the top, so AC is A squared, because there's a 1 here. And then B goes on the bottom, B is 2A. So what works here, what two numbers multiply to give you this and add to give you that? Obviously it's A and A, okay? So if I have x squared plus AX plus AX plus A squared, I can factor this by grouping. I'll just split it. I can just factor this by grouping. So from the first two, I can factor out x, and I'm left with x plus a. And then on the second two, I can factor out a. I'll be left with x plus a. And if I factor out this term and this term that are common, I'm going to have x plus a on the outside, and then x plus a on the inside. Since they both repeat themselves, you can have x plus a squared, okay? So you can see that every perfect square trinomial can be written as a square of a binomial. So basically x squared plus, let me put that in blue, 2ax plus a squared has a factored form x plus a squared. That's why it's called a perfect square trinomial. I could call them PSTs, okay? That's why it's called a perfect square trinomial, because this trinomial can be written as a perfect square, okay? All right, so let's go into the whole procedure for finding a perfect square trinomial. To do that, all you need to know is that how do you go from the center to the last one? So let's say I have the first two, x squared plus plus 2ax plus 2ax. If I have this piece, how can I find the third term to create a perfect square trinomial? So what can I add here to make this a perfect square trinomial? So we see the standard here. What can I do to this 2 to get this? Now this is a trick. Anytime you're doing a perfect square trinomial, all you need to do is you take b, the coefficient of the middle term, divided by 2 and square it. For all perfect square trinomials, if you do this, this will give you the term that completes the perfect square trinomial, okay? So in this case, b is 2a, right? B is 2a. What happens when I do b over 2? If I divide it by 2, I'm going to end up with a. If I square it, if I square this, I have a squared. So you can see that b over 2 squared gives me a squared. And guess what? I have a perfect square trinomial, because based on what we talked about before, this is what creates a perfect square trinomial. Alright, so anytime you hear the word perfect square trinomial, the first thing that should come into your mind is b over 2 squared. So when you hear completing the square, the first thing that should come into your mind is b over 2 squared, because this completes the square. Okay? All right, let's try out some examples. I'm going to do an easy example in this clip, and then there are more subsequent clips. I'll do more complicated problems. So example one, solve the quadratic equation Solve the quadratic equation by completing the square. Okay? And the quadratic equation under consideration is x squared minus 2x minus 24 equals 0. Okay? So one thing I can ask myself is this a perfect square trinomial? Let me act as though I don't know. There's a special formula for figuring that out, but that's not what we're focusing on today. So I want to solve this by completing the square. So I don't know if this makes it a perfect square. So what I'll do is I'll toss this over, and I'm going to add a term here that makes this a perfect square trinomial. So how do I legally move 24 to the other side? Just add 24 to both sides, right? Add 24, add 24. And then you're going to have x squared minus 2x equals 24. Now how do you complete the square? Remember, b over 2 squared completes the square. B in this case is negative 2. How on earth is that possible? Well, because this is a, the coefficient of x squared, which is like a 1. This is b. Okay? And then c has been tossed away to the other side. So b is the coefficient of x. Alright, so b, what are we going to do with this? We're going to divide it by 2, which is negative 1, and then we're going to square it. Remember, b over 2 square, right? You always square it. So what do we get when we do b over 2 squared? Negative 1 squared is just 1. So this number 1 completes the square. Alright, so we're going to have x squared minus 2x, and then we're going to add that 1 there, plus 1. Okay? So that we have a perfect square trinomial on the left side equals 24 plus 1. Okay? Because if you add a 1 here to preserve equality, you have to add a 1 on the right side also. Now there's a factoring trick to factor this perfect square trinomial. I don't have to use an x game here, the x game here. I can just take the square root of the first term and the last term, bring down the middle sign, and I'm going to have x minus 1 quantity square equals 25. Okay? Alright, now to get x by itself, I have to root both sides. So I'm going to square root both sides, root the left side and the right side. And that's going to yield the absolute value of x minus 1 equals 5. Alright, so another way of writing absolute value is the distance from 0 to the left or right, so I can write plus or minus x minus 1 equals 5. And I can divide both sides by plus or minus. So divide this by plus or minus, and divide that by plus or minus. And what you're going to end up with is x minus 1 equals plus or minus 5. Alright? So here we can split this into two equations. We can make it x minus 1 equals negative 5, or x minus 1 equals positive 5. So for this one, you just add 1 to both sides. You end up with x equals negative 4. And then this one, you subtract 1 from both sides. Actually, add 1 to both sides. And then you have x equals 6. Alright? So your solutions are negative 4 and 6. Okay? Alright, so there goes your answer. Thanks for paying attention to this presentation. Remember that you can always view my clips, subscribe to my videos and view my clips on mathgotserved.com, and do subscribe. Alright, and have a wonderful day.